Welcome to How to Write a Research Paper. The goal of this session is to get you started thinking about your research paper. We're going to cover 8 steps in the writing process, focusing on the first 4. I will pick up the additional 4 in week 3. The first step of the process is to define your topic. This is the first and often the most difficult step. It's said that a problem well defined is half solved. That is to say, take time to carefully select your topic. Look at the search strategy for a term paper in religion in the resource section. If you need to stop this video and go take a look at that, you can do so and then start up again with us. Search strategy for a term paper in religion. This document shows you how to start broad, then narrow your topic, and then expand on that. We call it the hourglass diagram. This document also talks about theological research, asking the questions, why research and why write? Finally, it has some good information about getting started in your research with suggestions for selecting your topic. To define your topic, begin very broadly. Then you narrow your topic. We'll tell you how to do that. Narrow it further and further until you arrive at a topic that's narrow enough for the scope of your paper, but broad enough to find resources for it. For example, the topic worship is too broad. But if you narrow too much, let's say country western worship in Texas between 1990 and 1995, well, that's too narrow. So let's explore that process. Look at the document called From Topics to Question in the resources section. Again, if you need to stop and look at that, pull that up and look at it. This one will help you work through your topic and the last discussion question for this week. Number 1, find a reason beyond your assignment to devote weeks or months pursuing and writing up what you find. It needs to be something that's important to you. It should interest you. You'll not want to spend the energy and the resources writing a research paper if you're not particularly interested in the topic. So start with brainstorming some ideas of the topics that interest you. It should fit your sense of purpose as well. So write them down. Don't analyze them or overthink them. Just write the topics that come to mind. Secondly, number 2, start with what interests you most deeply. List 2 or 3 interests that you'd like to explore. Skim a recent or an upcoming textbook. Talk to other students. Consult your professor. Is there a common belief that you suspect is much too simplistic or just plain wrong? Or a common practice that you detest? Don't just prejudge that belief or practice as wrong, but instead probe for something that you can show about that might lead others to reconsider it. Look for what resources are available to you in your library or on the internet to plan your research more efficiently because you know where to start. Now, from the broad topic you've selected, ask questions to begin to narrow, like who, what, when, where, how, and why. Most importantly is the how and the why. So let's look at an example from the sample research paper in your resources. Number 1, broad topic, spiritual language. Who should exercise spiritual language? It's a good question. What is spiritual language? When should one exercise spiritual language? Where in the Bible do we see evidence of spiritual language? Why should believers exercise spiritual language, and why do some believers not exercise spiritual language? Can you see these questions help open up and also narrow down a topic for you? Number 2, look at your broad topic again, but this time use nouns derived from verbs like conflict, description, contribution, or development. Here's an example. The broad topic again, spiritual language. Narrow topic would be the benefits to spiritual language to one's spiritual development. Here's another narrow topic. The contribution of Pentecostal theology to the exercise of spiritual language. Here's another way to narrow the topic. The evidence of spiritual language in the Bible. By combining the who, what, when, where, how, and why questions with nouns derived from verbs, you can come to a more narrow topic. Let's look at our examples again. Number one, the broad topic, we're using spiritual language. What is spiritual language? Why should believers exercise spiritual language? When should one exercise spiritual language? What do you want to find out about spiritual language? We could also ask, what are the benefits to spiritual language to one's spiritual development? Now, the combination of the two strategies or processes can produce the narrowed, more workable topic. The narrowed topic would be spiritual language as a discipline. Think about the topic you're going to write about. State it in a succinct sentence. I'm trying to learn about. For example, I'm trying to learn about spiritual language as a discipline. Then add a question to articulate its significance. Let's look at our example again. I'm trying to learn about spiritual language as a discipline because I want to find out why believers should exercise spiritual language. Finally, motivate your question. That is, you say, so what? What is your reader going to get from your writing? How do you expect that they will be changed by what you write? Here's just a thought. Every teaching, every sermon, every message should have a so what. So back to our example. I'm trying to learn about spiritual language as a discipline because I want to find out why believers should exercise spiritual language in order to help my reader understand that spiritual language is a gift from God for one's spiritual development. Now, if you can do this, then you have a clear topic and a good starting point for an outline, introduction, and a conclusion. Now that you have a clear topic, you want to plan your argument. You may be thinking, it's impossible to plan your argument until you've done your research. Well, yes and no. On one hand, you do need to do research before you write your paper. You don't want to just write off the top of your head and ramble on a topic. You want your paper to be informed, supported, with logical flow, and you won't have all the details of it yet. On the other hand, however, you have a sense of where you're going. You have a sense of what the topic is, why it's important, and what you want to accomplish. Now, we won't take time here to discuss these since this is from your reading in Turabian, but take time to read through that document and note the questions that may show up in your final exam. Keep in mind that a research argument is not a discussion or debate. It is an amiable conversation in which writer and reader reason together to solve a problem whose solution is not yet accepted. One may not necessarily oppose your view, they just don't have the information necessary to judge it yet. So in planning your argument, anticipate your reader's objections and questions and address them in your paper. Acknowledging opposing points of view shows that you've engaged the subject and that you've thought through your argument. This is really important. Anticipate your reader's objections and questions and address them in your paper. So, all arguments and research papers included consist of answers to 5 questions. Here are the 5. What are you claiming? This is your introduction. What are your reasons? What evidence supports your reasons? What about other points of view? How are your reasons relevant to your claims? Then end with a conclusion that summarizes your paper. What are you claiming? Here's your introduction. This is the question you wish to answer and your proposed answer. You want to be specific. Avoid using words like important, interesting, significant, valuable. Those words lose their power in an introduction. The fact that you're writing about this subject implies that you find it important, interesting, significant, valuable. We would assume that you're not going to write about it unless it's already those things. A research paper uses economy of words, so don't state the obvious. Next, you want to present your reasons and support for them. You must give logical evidence for your reasons. That is, Find outside sources that speak to your reasons. We want to avoid saying, I believe or I think. And this is a common pitfall. I believe, I think. We assume that you believe it or you think it, or you wouldn't be saying it. So this only diminishes the objectivity in your paper. You want your reader to know that this is not just your belief, but that it is a reasonable belief that is on good, solid foundation. Show them why it's reasonable. Anticipate their questions and their objections and respond to them. And let your reader know why this is relevant to your argument. Another way to look at this logical flow is that the argument consists of a claim, reasons, evidence, responses to questions, objections, and alternative points of view, and answers to questions of relevance. Once again, to summarize, your argument consists of answers to 5 questions. What are you claiming? This is your introduction. What are your reasons? What evidence to support your reasons? What about other points of view? How are your reasons relevant to your claims? Now, keeping those 5 questions in mind, you can build your outline. Look at Turabian, pages 62 through 70, for details on how to create an outline. Now, an outline is a logical, general description, a schematic summary, an organizational pattern, a visual, conceptual design of your writing. It reflects logical thinking and clear classification. The purpose of an outline is to facilitate the process of writing, organize your ideas, ensure that you're presenting your material in logical form, show the relationship between ideas in your writing, and then construct an ordered overview of your writing, and to define boundaries and groups. We will address these in week 3. Now, here are some steps to creating an outline. First, determine the purpose of your paper. And don't say, it's because the professor asked me to write it. You should have your topic and your purpose well defined. In our example, the topic and purpose are stated as, quote, I'm trying to learn about spiritual language as a discipline because I want to find out why believers should exercise spiritual language in order to help my reader understand that spiritual language is a gift from God for one's spiritual development. Now, there are many things that you could talk about when addressing the topic of spiritual language, and that's just our example. But you won't be able to address all of them, especially not in a short paper. So it's better to have, say, 3 points and go deep with those than to have 10 or 20 points at a surface level. Next, determine the audience that you're writing for. In our example, the intended audience is the professor. Yes, the professor is your primary audience when you are writing an academic paper. Don't discount that. Know your professor. Know what he's asking for. Know what he's already taught in class. The objectives and the learning outcomes of the course are going to drive that. And some have said that knowing your professor is 90% of the grade. I'm not sure if that's true, but you definitely need to know what he's looking for. Now, if you're writing a doctoral dissertation, your audience would be scholars and people in an academic environment. If you're writing a document for your church, then your church is the audience, and the sources and language you would use would be very different. If you're writing a paper for the finance committee in your church, how would that impact your sources and your language? So identify your audience. Notice that in many books, the authors will hint at what their intended audience is in the prologue, the foreword, or the introduction of the book. Normally you'll find that in the preface or in the first part of the first chapter of every book. Then we're going to brainstorm. That is to list all the ideas that you want to include in your paper. Again, be selective as to what you include. Include those things that are relevant to your narrow topic and objectives. You'll come across a lot of really good information, and if you're not careful, that good information will take you off track. So if it's not relevant to your purpose, it will only dilute your argument, make it difficult for your reader to follow. And then organize. Group your related ideas together. When you look at that brainstorm of ideas, see if there are several that can be grouped together into one main point with subpoints. Sometimes you can do this on a big piece of paper or tearing pieces of paper and rearranging them on a table, however you have to do that. Often when organizing, you'll see that there are some ideas that don't seem to fit. That's probably an indication that they don't. So don't force it. Just keep it simple, but keep them connected. And then order. Arrange material in subsections from general to specific and from abstract ideas to concrete ones. Keep in mind the 5 questions that must be addressed. What are you claiming? Again, that's your introduction. What are your reasons? What evidence supports your reasons? What about other points of view? And how are your reasons relevant to your claims? And then end with a conclusion that summarizes your paper. What have you said? And then we're going to label. Create main and subheadings. Look at the outline in the sample research paper found in the resources section. It has 6 main topics. Topic C has 5 subtopics. C1 has 4 subtopics. Topic E has 3 subtopics. So these define the logical flow of the paper. Now once you have a preliminary outline, you can start taking notes. It's possible that your outline will change somewhat based on what you find in your research. That's okay. Your outline will not be finalized until you're done writing your paper. So it's there, it's a skeleton, but it's not rigid. But having a clear idea of where you're going will help you in reading, selecting, analyzing, and evaluating your sources. And it will also keep the job from looking overwhelming to you. When you have a nice outline, then you can only write to one point at a time, and you know that you can eat that elephant just a little bit at a time. It'll help you psychologically for sure. So we're going to stop here for now. We'll address how to take notes and keep track of your working bibliography in week number 3. But if you're eager to get started on your actual research and you want to take notes, refer to the document in your resources called Note-Taking and Bibliographic Note Cards Handout. That's in your resource section, and that'll give you a head start. After you've gathered your notes, you'll write a prospectus, which will become the preface of your paper. We'll talk about that in week 3. The next step will be to develop the text. Then you develop your bibliography to ensure that all the works used in your text are cited and mentioned. The more citing, the more mentioning, the better in your research paper. Again, we'll talk about this in week 3. Finally, you'll read, edit, reread, edit some more, reread, edit again, and fine-tune. Don't ever think that your first draft is your final version. Give yourself time for re-editing. Get a head start. We'll talk about that in the next few weeks as well. Now that concludes the lectures for week 1. Now take some time to work through defining the topic for your research paper. Go back and listen to this lecture again if you need to, pick up whatever points. Post then your topics in the discussion forum and engage with your fellow students to narrow it down and articulate it, stating its significance. Now, don't delay on this. Get started as soon as you can. And next week you'll want to start gathering sources for your paper. So get started on it right away. Again, my suggestion, make this work for you on multiple levels. If you've got another sermon or teaching that you need to do, then that can help you define your topic. Thank you.